Hello, everyone. I'm Madison Skinner, co-chair of the 19th Annual Social Enterprise Conference, Capital for Good, and a current MBA student at Columbia Business School. I'm very excited to introduce you to our panelists today, who will be sharing their experience on what it's like founding and fundraising a business as a woman of color. All of our panelists today are building incredible organizations within the EdTech space, and the changes that COVID has wrought on the EdTech space has meant that each of these women have seen major changes to their businesses over the last 6 months. I'm going to do a quick intro of everyone, and then I'll hand it over to Erin, who will be moderating today's conversation. Kiara Butler, founder and CEO of Diversity Talks, which is a Rhode Island-based training company that specializes in providing student-led professional development grounded in diversity, equity, and inclusion. Amanda DoAmaral is an educator, activist, and the founder of Fiveable, a social learning network for students. Shani Dowell, founder and CEO of Possip, is a parent engagement platform that helps schools get real-time feedback from parents, teachers, and students. And Beverly Leon is founder and CEO of Local Civics, an edtech company transforming civics education by supporting students and educators in building their civic engagement and community leadership skills through game-based learning. And finally, last but not least, moderating the discussion will be Erin Walker, founder and CEO of Camelback Ventures, which is an accelerator that identifies, develops, and promotes early-stage underrepresented entrepreneurs with the aim to increase individual and community education and generational wealth. Thank you all for being here today, and I'm going to hand it over to you, Erin. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you, Madison, and thank you to everyone who is here to join us for this conversation. I feel like a good moderator is like a good umpire. They do their job, but you don't notice them. And even more so today, given the topic of the conversation around women of color. And so I'm going to do my best job to ask the questions and get out of the way and let these women shine. And so to talk about who they are and their experiences and get into some of the issues. So Madison sort of said everyone's name and gave a little bit of description on their venture. But what I'd like to start with for all of our panelists is just a question about what made you take the leap into entrepreneurship, particularly given the wide variety of sort of entry points, particularly from a career standpoint that each of you are coming from, whether it be educator all the way to professional athlete. So I'd love for that to be our introductory question for everyone to sort of understand a little bit more about you, your decision to start and found your company, and then we'll get into some other questions.
So I was kind of right out of college, I went into consulting and then found quickly that the impact I was looking to make was not kind of fully there. So went back and forth between business and nonprofit, and then eventually over time was working. A lot of the work I was doing was leading teacher recruitment teams. But then as I became a parent and it worked with lots of school leaders, personally just saw through a dinner table conversation I had with my husband, just the need to improve the opportunity for parents to share easily with their schools, what's going well and what's not going well. And so had the idea of a dinner table conversation, had a full-time job, but just couldn't let the idea go. I've had ideas all of my life, and I'm in my 40s, so I've had ideas for decades. But I would apply to a programmer. I was always looking for some external validation or some external person to say like, yep, you can do this. We're going to give you money to do this, or you have permission to do this. And this was the first time where I was like, I'm just going after the idea and the opportunity and then the customers. And so it just really wouldn't let me go because I believed so deeply in the idea and wasn't looking for external validation anymore. So I think that's a little bit about how I came to entrepreneurship.
Cool. Thank you, Shani. Kiara or Beverly or Amanda?
Yeah, so I was a teacher. I taught 9th and 10th grade history in Oakland for 5 years. And then after I left my classroom, I honestly wasn't really sure what I was going to do next and kind of wandered around and worked on a campaign. But some of my former students started reaching out to me, asking me for help. And that was really the beginning of my entrepreneurship journey, because they were just like, Miss D, you got to help us. Like, we're all about to fail this AP US history test. Like, we don't know what to do. And so I just started live streaming for them. And then that kind of then quickly evolved into like, well, I bet there's other kids that need help, and I bet, you know, more people need this. And so then I really started like diving into learning about building a business and a startup and all the things that came with that, mostly just to like expand my classroom. That's kind of how it felt for me. So that's kind of my background.
I'll jump in next before my internet kicks me out again. It's snowing here. Hello, everyone. I'm Kiara. I'm the CEO and founder of Diversity Talks. I think really for me, it took moving from Mississippi, where I grew up in a predominantly Black school district and city, and moving to Rhode Island, where there was this student-teacher diversity gap, and there wasn't the reflection of the students in the classroom or in the curriculum. I think it also took me working for the largest district in Rhode Island, and going to work every day, whether it was when Trump got elected.
Oh, Kiara might be frozen. Let me give her a second. If not,
or when people got. Can you hear me now?
There you go. You froze on the word Trump. I'm not sure what that means.
Man, I think that means a lot. Yeah, it was seeing Trump being elected, seeing people being murdered that looked like me, and going to work and no one was talking about it. Am I frozen again?
No, you're good.
All right. And then really thinking about what are our students experiencing in the classrooms and how.
Oh, she might be frozen again.
I'm happy to jump
Or
in.
they express.
In a second.
Go ahead, Beverly.
All right, go ahead, Beverly.
Yeah, no, really excited to be here. I think my journey to entrepreneurship and founding Local Civics was one of passion, but also one that reflected my academic and professional experience. So prior to launching Local Civics, so recent 2020 grad from CBS. So excited to have the Columbia folks here. But my journey to Columbia was through trying to get Local Civics off the ground. And prior to that, I have worked with young people in youth development spaces and sport for more than 10 years. I was a professional soccer player, so my time playing and moving through different countries, I'd worked with young people in cities across Europe, young people in Harlem, where I spent years playing and coaching for FC Harlem. And as I moved and retired from that sport, the experiences I had and the lack of connection I saw amongst the young people I worked with every day through the lens of sport really demonstrated that, one, there weren't many opportunities to connect young people to their local community through technology. And two, no one was really building for that group of young people in the way that I thought technology could be used to close those gaps. And so when I retired from soccer, went to try and study this, got so far to realize, hey, sport, all these avenues for young people to participate in civic and community life are really important, but these huge gaps persist. And I made a decision when I was studying at Oxford that I could continue and do the academic research, go get a PhD and continue proving out that this was a challenge for young people, or I could actually dive in and try to solve that problem in real time. And to echo Kiara, this was right after the 2016 election. I was living in Brexit country in the UK, in the northeast of the UK, and really had internal reflections say, what am I going to do to try and stimulate and grow civic engagement? What is my role in that? And Local Civics was the seed. And moving to Columbia Business School was really the impetus to say, what does building a sustainable business model look like? And that's really my entrepreneurial journey.
Thank you all for sharing that. Often the face of entrepreneurship does not often look like, or at all look like, in terms of the popular narrative, the faces of the folks who are on this panel. And so when I think about that, it also strikes me that at the same time, Black women and Latinx women are often, depending on sort of the data that you read, the fastest growing group of entrepreneurs over the last, 10, 15 years. And so for me, what that signals is that there's certainly no lack of desire and ambition, but definitely a lack of support. And so I'd love to get your perspective on, what gaps exist to support Black women as entrepreneurs, and in your opinion, what could be done to continue to, support Black women in their efforts for entrepreneurship. I know that there are places like Digital Undivided, but there probably need to be, more of those. But what else would you add in your experience as ways that we can fill some of those gaps?
I mean, I think the first one I just think about is good business. Like if there was even like a more fair playing field where, the meritocracy existed in the way that people talk about it, like that would be a good starting point. So I was just on a call with the board I'm on, and they were talking about how to grow the number of people participating in this. It's like a small business. It's an entrepreneur center board, and they wanted to increase the number of people in a small business. And they were talking about radio stations that they were going to start advertising on, and the radio stations were like rock, kind of like young 20s, probably a white demographic. And so I said, hey, remember to advertise on Black radio stations and Latinx radio stations. And then one of the people who worked there said, oh, yeah, we do want to make sure we reach out to our underserved community. And I'm like, it's just good business. You're probably going to get more efficient marketing dollars, hit more people, more diverse people for less money. Like, it's just good business. And so I really think the thing we really need first is just like folks walking their talk and actually caring about business, because I think that'll lead them to invest more and believe more and do business more with Black and women of color owned businesses. So that's definitely the start. And then I do think, you're mentioning of Digital Undivided. There's TP Insights, the kind of the media that Sherry has. I think just kind of more things that are bringing stories and narratives. So just kind of from every direction, from investors to media to business owners, like every part of the ecosystem. We just need more voices and representation there.
Yeah, and I'll jump in too. I think, Aaron, one of the biggest frustrations for me as a Black entrepreneur and female founder is that a lot of folks think it's a pipeline problem. But I think from the question, we know, and if you're a Black female founder, you know other Black female founders. We exist. And one of the other, I think, interesting data points that I think Black women know, and a lot of folks don't know, is that Black women are the most educated, the highest educated demographic in the United States. And so we're more than qualified. We have the expertise in the areas that we're actually launching businesses. So it's not a pipeline problem. It's not an expertise or knowledge problem. And part of that, to Shani's point, is that the opportunities or doors and opportunities are closed, whether it's through, I think, bias and also through just lack of ability to access social capital, lack of ability for folks to believe that we are capable of actually launching successful ventures and building them, and then not opening that door or extending the capital. So for Digital Undivideds, we need 100x those, right? As opposed to all the Black female founders or Black entrepreneurs trying to access that same bucket of capital. It's definitely not the pipeline.
Yep, 100%. I'll just ask a follow-up question to this idea, which is all of the businesses that you all have created, have like a social bent to them. And oftentimes, one of the things I've seen is people struggle with this decision of, do I start a for-profit? Do I start a nonprofit? And I think sometimes there's an inclination that if I'm trying to do something that has a social impact, that let me just do it as a nonprofit. I'd love for a couple people to share their decision around starting their companies as for-profits.
Yeah, I can speak to this. I think that there's a huge opportunity in social impact, right? Like when you actually just think about like a market opportunity to like build a product that is accessible and creates equity, like people want this. And there's not enough businesses that do that. Like I'm in the education space, and there's a lot of tutoring companies or education companies that charge a bunch of money and put price tags on like getting into college and getting all these, different things. And so whenever, you're pitching to investors or whatnot, they constantly remind you of that, of like, why aren't you just like charging a bunch of money for all this other stuff? And I think the the way that I've always come at it is like, because there's like so many other kids that are not being served. And I feel like that's the missed business opportunity. So one of the reasons why I decided to be for profit was because honestly, I felt like I could access a lot more resources that way and build the company faster to like actually like get to our goals. And that so far has been true. Like, I think in terms of raising money and just like kind of building that case out and really being able to get the opportunities that we needed and the support from people that we needed, that was the right decision. Because otherwise, like if we were just a nonprofit, then people would look at us like a charity case or like that we're, whatever. And it's just like, it's degrading and it's not necessarily what I wanted. And I also think that we have opportunities too to build a nonprofit wing of what we do. Right? Like we can always like kind of have an offshoot or have like funds or other types of money that is kind of like distributed differently. But for our main company to be for profit, that was important so that we were taken seriously, like in the whole grand scheme of things.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll just
Go ahead. Yeah.
I was going to say, just kind of to my earlier point about like looking for permission the whole time, I felt like also part of why I wanted to be.
I'll just echo Amanda.
Sorry.
There's a really long lag in my Zoom. So can you all hear me right now? All right. So I just want to echo Amanda from my Zoom kicks me out again. There's over 3,000 nonprofits in Rhode Island, and they're all battling for the same funding. And so in creating diversity talks, I want to be really intentional in creating a sustainable organization that did not rely on philanthropic dollars. As Amanda said, like people consider like if you're a nonprofit, they think that things are supposed to be free. And while I do think that they should be accessible, we should also be able to charge for our work based off of the value of the work that we're giving. I feel like I'm racing against the clock, so I'm just going to leave it at that point before I freeze again.
Thank you, Kiara. Sorry, I know, Shani, you're trying to say something. Go for it.
Oh, yeah. And I was just going to say, in the spirit of like not asking for permission, I mean, you do have to ask for a sale and eventually have to ask for funders or investors. But I was able to go and say like, no, I already know people want this. And so I don't have to go to a funder and have the funder say, oh, I want people to have this, therefore I'm going to fund you to have it. I wanted to be able to go to schools or families and say like, hey, do you think this is valuable to you? And then from there, that be kind of why we created and existed.
Yeah. Let's continue on this thread a little bit talking about business. 20% overall of all businesses have closed in the U.S. due to COVID. As probably comes no surprise, Black businesses are at 40%. Here you all are with for-profit companies in the midst of COVID. What are some of the things that you are doing to pivot in this particular moment to sort of keep your company going? What lessons have you learned, particularly with relatively newer companies in this moment in time that you want to share with other folks?
So I can jump in there first. One is that I launched Local Civics. We had been operating and running pilots very closely with local schools in New York City. So I spent half of my time in Uris Hall at Columbia Business School and the other half in a classroom in the South Bronx before schools closed in New York. So we were working in person with our educators, using technology, implementing it on the ground, and trying to make sure that our customers had the best experience possible. And then schools close, and beyond that, schools are faced with tremendous pressures to serve students, families, and communities beyond what they were already doing. And so really quickly in the spring, when I was able to go full time, we just supported our customers by asking them, what are the biggest challenges you're facing? And we found that schools were really struggling to convert their curriculum into an online engaging format. And we had a really small, lean team. I think there were about 3 or 4 of us at that point that quickly adapted all of our in-person programming, professional development, and civics curriculum into an engaging, interactive online experience, which we could then engage schools with. And that was actually really exciting to go and then offer that as not only a new service, but also a huge, a really incredible solution for schools that were urgently trying to support families and also build pretty much a new school and curriculum in the midst of a few months. And so that's actually been very successful for us, though it's ramped up the pace at which we've all needed to work and engage not just in our mission of what we're trying to do, but be highly flexible and adaptable about how we're achieving that and through different means.
Yeah, I'd say a couple of things to echo what Beverly said, but one of the things that really helped us was being connected to folks with resources. So as an example, the Ppp Loan, which I know a lot of Black businesses missed out on, and we probably would have missed out on it too, but we knew someone who had someone on their board from a bank and who was saying like, hey, this money's gonna run out. Y'all need to get your application in before. And then even actually when we were applying through our big bank, the big kind of commercial bank, they were not responding. And so having known that it was gonna be a limited pool, luckily someone who's one of our investors said, hey, I'm on the board of a small bank here in Nashville. Let's reach out to them and see if they'll actually submit your application for you. All of that is stuff that I would not have known. And I'm sure the average Black business doesn't have access to, but really it was a privilege. And so that's something that really helped us because we did need that money at that time just to have the space to breathe and to think all right, how are we going to structure ourselves? And then from there, very similar to what Beverly said, we just tried to figure out what do folks need at this time? Clearly kids weren't in schools anymore. So how our pulse check questions work is we ask families are you happy with your child's school? School had basically been shut down for at least a period of time. And so, during that time while we were just figuring out how to support them, we realized actually what schools are trying to do in this time is they're just trying to meet families' needs. And so they need a way to hear from families routinely. And so we changed our pulse check question to that, are we meeting your child's needs? And then followed up on the technology or the food needs. And so it really ended up growing kind of pre-COVID and post-COVID by 6x in terms of number of schools we were serving, number of families we were serving. And then kind of what Beverly shared about really transitioning and adapting really quickly. And I do think that was something, I think that's part of also being part of just a group of other folks who are pushing or kind of thinking about how do we adjust and adapt. And I think that that's something that could be extended. I don't know how necessarily to kind of help people think creatively about how to adjust, but even in local restaurants in my community, I see that where I'm if you would just, could you do this? Sometimes you'll still call people and say, hey, can you do curbside delivery? And they say, no. It's no, what do you mean you can't do it? Let's figure out a way to adjust to this new reality. And so, so I think that those were a couple of things for us.
Cool. I'd love to talk a little bit about money. And I see that there are a couple questions that listeners have put in the Q&A box. I'm going to try to merge a couple questions at once. So I know we were just talking about the decision to go for profit and what that means in terms of being able to accelerate the growth of the business and by definition, then accelerating impact. Some of you raised venture capital, others of you have not. I would love to just have a couple of you share your decision to raise money or not, particularly venture capital. And then there's a person who was curious to understand a little bit more about how did you think about taking on investors while maintaining control of your company?
Yeah. You all can hear me. So I decided to start a nonprofit solely for the reason that I knew I wanted to own my work as a Black woman and that I didn't want it to be something governed by the state. I think I feel the same way around seeking venture capital, which is why we are about 20% earned revenue, 80% philanthropic. So we haven't tapped into that venture capital landscape yet. I watch Shark Tank all the time, but that is not something, a road I want to go down just yet as far as a company when it comes down to the ownership of my company. And so that's just my quick response again.
I've raised $3.5 million at this point, and I think the decision for me was there was definitely a part where it was just we needed funding, and I knew that investors could write checks quickly. And that was sort of one side of it. The other side of it is it really opens up a lot of doors. In some ways, I kind of always felt with certain solutions, you're kind of the chosen one, you know, like they just have to sort of fund it and decide that you're the one that's going to build this. And I wanted to be in the room. I wanted to like have the you know, the people that I respected as investors, like on my side, on my team. And the way that I've really thought about it is like, yeah, I've had to give up control of the company, but this is not about me. This is about what we're building here. And I can't do this alone. Just as much as I need a team to work with me every day, I also need investors who can open up a lot of other doors in terms of actually having funds, but even way beyond the funds, like the connections that they bring and the experience that they have, like they, you know, finding the right people is really important, right? Like for me, it's less about like, you know, whether or not to raise and more that there's a lot of different investors and there are some that like you definitely don't want to give up any part of your company to, but there are others that are incredibly powerful and impactful and really care about your mission and have worked in similar fields and can open up a lot of spaces so that you can like be, you know, you can expand your reach. And that's kind of how I felt going into it, is that I just knew that like I needed other people. And so I just was okay with sharing that.
I probably partially started raising money because I was naive and thought it would be easy. So I think I was like, I need money, I'm going to raise money. And so when I quit my full-time job in 2018, I quit in July. I kind of had a year-long plan. I told them I was going to transition out. I was really self-funding for a year and a half. And I kind of just felt like once I was full-time, because you hear this narrative, oh, you need to be full-time. So I was like, oh, once I'm full-time, that's all that's standing between me and getting investments. So I thought, like, you know, once I left, that I would raise money. And we had customers by the time I was out there. And so I really thought like, okay, that year that I left, we, you know, hit 6 figures in revenue, which you see a lot of companies getting millions of dollars with no revenue. So I was like, okay, we've got that. I've got a ton of education experience. I have a Stanford MBA. Like, I'm a Black woman. You always kind of think that people talk about these things, so these things matter. And yet it was still incredibly hard to raise money. And really, like, when I really, really started raising money, to Amanda's point, was when I was desperate. So because I had been self-funding, by December of 2018, not when my personal money was running out, that meant Possip's money was running out. And literally in December of 2018, we had like $3,000 in the bank. And so that was when I really, you know, what they say, like, necessity is the mother of invention. That's when I really started going out, and that's when we got our first 100K. And then over that next year, it really took a year to raise $1 million. But in the middle of this pandemic in July, I went out to current investors to raise another 500K and ended up raising another $1 million. So back then it was neat. And then by this past summer, when I raised, it was really growth, where we had growth opportunity that we needed to be prepared to meet. And so that was a real big difference. But also to Amanda's point, like, our investors are awesome. Like, even at times where I've thought about going out and raising more money, luckily I have mostly like angels, but they've always pushed me and said, like, you know, why, like, what's the purpose? Like, when you're making decisions about your company, are you making them because you think they're best for their company, or do you think they're best for like raising money in the future? And their push is always to do what I think is best for the company. And so luckily I have investors who are super patient. It's convertible notes. So far I still have over 90% ownership, but really long-term, like, I love my current investors so much that when I'm making decisions, I'm thinking like, how do I make sure that they're making money too? And so I really am thinking that I want them to share in the success of this company, because they also believed in me and believed in this idea before other people have. And so I'm happy to share reasonable portions of the success with them as well. So those are a couple of things that I've been thinking about.
Awesome.
Yeah, and I could jump into there just to, because Local Civics, we haven't raised any outside capital yet, and are just using earned revenue to fund our growth. I think one of the things that Kiara mentioned earlier, and to your question about why to structure as a for-profit, I think fundraising is a full-time job. And so the decision I've been making is, how do I get this company as far as possible and generate as much revenue and grow through that revenue before I go and ask for someone else's money? One, to put us in the best position possible to raise that money, and on terms that are advantageous to the team that is building it, but also to make sure that we have a sustainable business. And I think that proof point for myself, just from going to seed of idea to running a company, was really important. And the other thing is fundraising also in the nonprofit space, you still have doing that funding is still inequitable, right? So I knew in either of those channels, I was going to face an uphill battle. In one of them, I was able to actually control a little bit more of the destiny of the company, and truly make sure that we were mission aligned and hitting our impact metrics before engaging impact investors that may have impact as, we'd like it to run parallel, but really we need to make sure that the financial growth is there. But it's really nice that you're having an impact. So that was really my decision making. But I think we're hitting sort of a growth period where we'll need outside capital to scale at the pace for local civics really to grow. So.
Awesome. Yeah, sometimes just have to pick your heart. So I appreciate that. And Amanda, I just loved how you're like, yeah, we raised $3.5 million. Just like owning that. And I think this is like really important as well, right? Oftentimes we have a tortured relationship, particularly in this country, with money. And so I just sort of love how you did that. I know it's time for some Q&A. Madison, if you want to jump in, I'm trying to look through and synthesize some of these questions, but.
Yeah, absolutely. I think everyone who's listening, if you want to upvote the questions that you like, that will help us figure out which questions are getting most interest from the audience. The first question here is, what made each of you pursue entrepreneurship versus trying to shift systems from within? I know several of you have educator backgrounds, so would be particularly curious about that lens.
I can speak to this really quick. I think as I was working in a public school in a classroom, I really started feeling burned out. And it was because I felt like I cared so much about my students and about the community I was teaching in, and I could not make any more change. It was like my four walls in my classroom were the as far as I could get. And no matter how hard I tried and I was there for 5 years, which doesn't feel like a long, but at my school, it felt like each year was 3 years. I went from leadership roles to I did everything I could to try to make change at my school, at the district level, across the schools. And so, I just every step of the way, it was like blocker after blocker after blocker. And it just got to a point where it just was I felt like I was just spinning my wheels. And so for me, leaving the classroom made sense because I was just burnt out and I felt like I was, 27 and done. And that's not where I wanted to be. And so after that, I think once I started really learning more about entrepreneurship, things started really opening up for me, because then it just kind of re-engaged me. It felt like this open runway of challenges and of opportunity. And I could just sprint down this path. Whereas this other path just felt like blocker after blocker after blocker. And so that's just where my decision has come from. And I've just been able to, I think, reach more kids and expand my impact because I'm not in the system, essentially, kind of operating outside of it.
Great. Anybody else want to weigh in on that question? Shani, you're on mute.
Sorry. Yeah, I was just going to say that just being later in my career, I worked for a number of organizations, and I just felt I think there are two sides of it. One is I had put out a lot of great ideas that were living and breathing, and I was really proud of, but also I felt like at the end of the day, it was ultimately a lot of white people who were getting credit for some of the things that I had put out into the system. And so I think I was just ready to just be the one who's this is my idea and I'm going to see it all the way through. And then also having been at pretty senior levels in the organizations I was, ultimately felt like I was battling to get a lot of things done. And I just was kind of if I really think I have a vision for how things should happen, and I'm willing to sign on and put my name on the line for thinking this is good, then let me go do that.
Completely. I'm going to combine two questions here. One is about, can you share a moment as a founder that sort of encapsulates or captures the challenges of being a Black female founder? And then on the other side of that, what is it about your identity that makes you uniquely able to start the companies that you started and play the role that you're playing?
I have one horror story. I think the biggest thing is like, I'm not assumed to be the entrepreneur, right? Like that's not when I walk into the room, that's just like not what people assume that I am. And so one time I was pitching a group of angel investors, and I should have known better that these were not going to be the best partners and that they weren't going to be aligned. But it was actually it was like down in Tennessee, and it was held at this like country club, and we walked in and just like all white men. And it was like a little like, meet and greet at the beginning. And so I'm kind of walking around, like just sort of like picking someone to like go and introduce myself. And as I like extend my hand to introduce myself to this man, he literally just handed me his plate. And I was like, I'm here to pitch like this business, this opportunity to this room of investors. And you think I'm here to like clean up after you. So like at that moment, I knew that there was no chance they were going to invest in this. My time was so wasted even being there. And so it was just like, he realized it in the moment of just kind of like pulling back. And I didn't really say anything because I didn't know what to say. But I think that's the biggest thing, is that you're just, when I'm in a room and people don't know who I am, I'm not assumed to be an entrepreneur. That's not what the cognitive label that people give me. And it's hard to like come back from that.
Yeah, I think, Amanda, one of the things that's really challenging is like sort of seeing the bias in person and just experiencing that. I think it wasn't quite on the nose as your experience, but through just being an entrepreneur, even at a place like Columbia, I've had several other Black founders, female founders, sort of be recommended that they form a company together, each with several different ideas in totally different spaces, tackling huge problems that were all independently worthy and large enough to tackle on their own. And the recommendation was that, hey, this other Black woman is also working in this space. You two should just found a company together, instead of actually pursuing these two perfectly viable billion-dollar companies and ideas. And that was one of the, I think, that sort of subtlety and nuance of, hey, we're not actually we can't understand the problems you're tackling, but hey, we see you're both Black women and Black entrepreneurs. You should just work together. You may be successful, was one of the moments that, there are institutional and structural barriers for, one, people to open opportunities and doors for you, and two, even see what you're building as a problem, which I'm sure, there are countless examples of folks saying, I don't think this is a big enough problem, or is that market size really that big? Maybe you should go and work in this other space that is just tangential. So.
Yeah, just to build on that, a number of times when I was pitching or kind of talking to investors, they would say, oh, I need to take this idea to my wife. She's the one who like does the communication with the school. And so just the idea that like they're so far removed from something that is like so central to our daily lives, which is like how the school and parent communication happens. And then also another kind of dimension to, being a Black woman is I was at a pitch event that was very large. It was a Black company-led kind of pitch event. And there were 10 people who were pitching, 2 of whom were Black women. And ultimately, the winner in my mind actually wasn't like necessarily the strongest candidate, but there were some things that around kind of like, we just don't have a hierarchy. Like we love athletes, we love celebrities, we just love some of those things. And so I just, that event led me to leave and say like, oh, it's true. I really am going to have to work like twice as hard, because I actually didn't think I should have won, but I did think the other Black woman who had a very strong idea, but again, was one that was unique to her experiences as a Black woman. And so I think to that part of the question, I do think that that's one of the benefits of being a Black female founder. One is there are amazing other Black female founders. And so I've built this very strong network and relationship group, but then also you do see the world in a different way. And that's a really great opportunity to build, like Beverly said, strong businesses and also have an amazing impact.
Great, thank you. And Kiara, thank you for sharing your feedback in the chat. I appreciate it. I'm curious about the role of mentorship. Some of the challenges you just talked about were that there weren't any folks who were on the investment side that looked like you or shared your experiences. So what role has mentorship played in your success to date? Have you each had access to diverse mentors or programs led by persons who look like you?
I have, yeah. And I think that mentorship has been really important for me. Um, I think I think a lot of times, like, especially like founders of color are like over mentored and like there's like so many of these things of like put them in another like accelerator and or things like that. And so you have to be kind of careful. But I also think that having like really trusted like advisors and mentors is everything, because you really need the support. Like you need people to help you make decisions and understand what options you even have. Like you only know what you know. And so I think like for me, when I first started, I really saw like Shark Tank as like that's where investors were. And I didn't know that any of this other stuff existed. Like that I could be in a company, that I could be raising money, that I could be pitching investors. Like I just didn't see that as like real life. And so I think that for me, the really early, I did an early program called Beta Boom, and it was for like underrepresented founders. And the two people that ran that, it changed everything, because it opened everything up, right? It made me see that like I could be in this space. I just needed to learn like how to make a pitch deck and how to pitch it and how to understand the VC math, like how to understand what they were looking for and how to target them and how to navigate the entire system. So having people that you can just like text on the regular and like ask them about really strategic things, or just be like, today was really hard and I don't know what I'm going to do, is just really important.
Yeah, Beta Boom is awesome. And I think like finding great programs. So for me, it was the Google Black Founder Exchange, which was like the application was so easy at the time. I don't think I expected. It's been just a program that's been with us from that time, and so that's been really good. And then investors and like and non like not white people who like made a bunch of money. I mean, like that was the first time I actually like someone who was like pushing me to think, because I mean, to me, $1 million was still like a lot. And so like someone who's like pushing like, hey, like how many, how big do you think this can get? But then folks who like just run companies. So it's been, in some ways, it's like trying to figure out like who to listen to. But I mean, I've been very fortunate and grateful to be part of lots of opportunities to get advice, mentorship, coaching. And then just again, like sometimes I don't want to call it mentorship, because mentorship implies something different. Whereas I feel like a lot of business leaders go out and get all the things they need, but it's not quite called mentorship. So I'm not sure what I want to call it. But anyway, yes, lots of homes for good advice and people supporting.
An extra shout out to 1863 Ventures and the pipeline program that was like one of my favorite things, because I was in a room of all women and women of color, and we all could just like drop our walls. And it was like the most powerful like week, an emotional week, because you just didn't have to like, have it all together for a minute. And so finding those types of experiences is really important.
Can you all hear me? Yes, no? Can you hear me? Yes. So I just want to add to this last thought, which is around like not being afraid to seek advice from people and not being afraid to ask. There were a lot of instances where I would be in rooms and I would shy away from asking someone, so what about this idea that I have? Because I either thought that they were going to think that I was crazy or that they didn't have time. But now that I am being seen as a mentor, I'm like, yeah, just hit me up. I'll take 15 minutes. I'll take 30 minutes. We can talk through your business model. And so like just knowing that people are there sharing that space with you and willing to has been helpful.
Great, thank you. With that, I'm going to pass it back to Erin, who will wrap us up with the last question and close out the conversation.
Yes. Did I take myself off mute? I did. So last question to wrap this up. As a founder and an entrepreneur, what has been your proudest moment?
So I'll jump in on this one. And I think I'll give a bit of a non-traditional answer because it's a very real one. So apart from, building a really talented, lean team and serving hundreds and over 1,000 kids in the last year, my proudest moment in the past year has, I have my youngest brother is a 12th grader. So he was in 11th grade last year, didn't have a single live synchronous class from March to June. In a suburban town outside of Boston. And he was joining our live local civics instructional, like our live courses. And at the in the middle of the summer, he sort of reflected back and he doesn't really try to flatter me, but he said that it was the best learning experience he had for the past 6 months was being in our sessions and engaging with the hundreds of other students he was learning with. And he said he struggled to learn in his, in the 3 months he had a virtual school and the best learning experience he had with us. So that is literally like, if I can pinpoint the proudest moment, that's it. There's all the business stuff, but I'll sort of hang my hat on that for a while.
Awesome.
So for me, I think about a little over a year ago, won this pitch competition for Launch Tennessee. And part of why that was like my proudest moment was because it did represent, by that time we were in over 100 schools and had already seen the impact with those schools. But then also, I mentioned this Google Black Founders Exchange. There were 4 other Black women from the Google Black Founders Exchange who were there with me, and just their pride, like they were crying, like they had just won the money. And then like we went back to my house after that and they're like, oh, you're so close to raising $1 million. You just need to go push for it. And so I saw the inspiration that it was providing to them, but then they were also providing inspiration to me. And so it represented the kind of what I think about why I'm an entrepreneur, which is providing an impact to schools and families, but then also providing a model for other Black women founders. And so just that was kind of a really proud moment for me.
I have to choose between 2, but recently we had just closed the seed round, and this was the first time our bank account went over $1 million because we had funds coming in. And my grandmother was like, it had been, we should have reached that because we were waiting on one other check before. And so she was like, you have to send me this picture. I've never seen $1 million in a bank account before. You have to send me the screenshot. And then it didn't happen over the summer. And then it finally happened when I raised all these funds, and we were up to almost $3 million. And so to send her that screenshot was probably the coolest thing ever. Cause she was literally just crying on FaceTime. Cause she was just like, I don't know anyone who's had that much money in a bank account, almost they don't really know exactly what I'm doing or how I'm getting that money or what that even means. But they're just no one in the family has ever done anything like that. And this is so cool. You willed this idea out of nothing. And then you just went and did it. And now you have, all these figures in your bank account to show for it. And so I think that was a really cool moment because it just was I don't know. It makes you feel you really are your ancestors' wildest dreams, right? They had never thought about this kind of thing. And so this is just a very cool thing to do.
Yeah, and I guess I'll close with my proudest moment was growing my team this year to a team of 10. And then really thinking of the impact that we can now have as a team of 10 versus me being a team.
Awesome. Well, thank you, everyone, for sharing. And it is a proud moment for me to be with all of you. I feel as though one of the obligations that I have, particularly as a person who identifies as a Black man, is to elevate Black women who I do not think often have people doing that enough for them. So I appreciate being here and being able to share the stage with all of you. So pass it back to Madison and the team.
Awesome. Yeah, couldn't echo that more, Aaron. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. And you can join in 10 minutes for a conversation with Cheryl Wu Dunn, and we hope to see you there. So thanks, everyone, and have a great one.